Hey there and welcome. Today, we're jumping headfirst into a pretty intense political firestorm. But, and this is important, we're not here to pick a side. Nope. Instead, we're going to look at the tools people use to argue. We'll take a real-world clash and see how arguments get built, and, how they can be completely dismantled.
And wow, does it get dramatic. It all kind of culminates in this one line from a blog post, a line that's making some huge claims about one of the most powerful political families in the Philippines. I mean, talk about a mic drop. This is a final statement that's absolutely designed to hit you hard.
But that brings us to the big question, right? Is the argument actually built to last? If you strip away all the drama, all the high-stakes language, what are you left with? Is the logical foundation solid, or is it full of holes? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dig into. So to figure this out, we're looking at two main sources. On one side, we've got the original blog post, the one making all these explosive claims. It's trying to draw a straight line between the father, Rodrigo Duterte, and his daughter, Sara. And on the other side, we've got a detailed critique that really tears into the logic of that blog post. It's less about the facts and more about how the argument is put together. Okay, so before we really dive into the nitty-gritty of all this, we need to gear up. We need a really important tool for our thinking toolkit. And that tool is understanding something called logical fallacies. So, what in the world is a logical fallacy? Simply put, a logical fallacy is just an error in reasoning. It's a flaw that makes an argument invalid. The best way to think about it is like this. Imagine a building. The bricks, those are your facts. They might be perfectly fine, totally solid. But if the foundation holding them all together is cracked, well, the whole thing is going to be shaky and it could just crumble. That's a logical fallacy.
All right, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's put this theory into practice and see how these fallacies actually show up in the wild. We're going to take what we just learned and apply it straight to the claims made in that blog post and the logical critiques that followed. Okay, so the blog post kicks things off with a pretty bold claim. It talks about former President Rodrigo Duterte's own admission of using a death squad. But here's the twist. The blog argues this wasn't just a one-off thing. No, it frames it as a family tradition. And boom, the critique immediately flags this. This is where we see our first potential logical fallacy, and it's called a hasty generalization. The rebuttal basically asks, hold on a second, can you really call something a family tradition based on the actions of just two people? I mean, is a sample size of two really big enough to establish a whole pattern? The critique says, absolutely not. But it doesn't stop there. The critique then starts to pull at another thread. This link the blog is trying to create between the father's actions and the daughter's alleged actions. It really questions the foundation of that connection. So the critique calls this one out as guilt by association. It's a classic. The argument here is that, look, just because someone knows someone or is seen with someone, you can't just assume they're doing the exact same thing for the exact same reasons. You have to look at their own specific actions, not just who's in their orbit. Now, the blog post starts to build its case even further. It's not just about connecting two people anymore. Now, it's trying to lay out this identical pattern, a sequence of events that it claims will lead to a very specific and predictable outcome. So check out how they structure this argument. The blog lays out a step-by-step pattern. You start by recruiting criminals, you use them, you operate in the shadows, and it all ends, supposedly, when you abandon them and the whole system just collapses. It's presented as this almost domino effect. One thing leads directly to the next. But wait, the critique comes right back at this and calls it a slippery slope fallacy. The whole problem with a slippery slope argument is that it claims that one small step will inevitably lead to a huge disastrous conclusion. It presents this chain of events as a sure thing. But the critique points out that you have to actually prove each link in that chain. You can't just say, step one automatically equals a total system collapse down the line. And the blog really doubles down on this. It hits us with another one of those short, punchy lines designed for maximum impact. The message is clear. Even if things look a little different on the surface, the core model, the pattern, the fatal flaw, it's all the same. This right here, this is where you can really see the heart of the disagreement. The critique points out that, hang on, the actual allegations are really different. For Rodrigo Duterte, it was an admitted death squad to kill criminals. For Sara Duterte, the allegation is about using a bagman to move money. So that makes you wonder, are those two things really similar enough to be called the same model? The critique says, no way. It calls this a false analogy. Basically, it's arguing that comparing an admitted death squad to an alleged money mover is like comparing apples and, well, something that's definitely not an apple. It ignores some pretty huge legal and moral differences, and that makes the whole comparison weak.
Okay, so we've deconstructed all of that. What's the point? What's the big takeaway here? Why should you care about spotting these logical fallacies in the first place? Why does any of this matter?
Look, the whole point of this explainer was never to tell you who's right or wrong in this political drama. Not at all. It's to show you that arguments, especially the really powerful, emotional ones, can have serious cracks in their logic. And that's the real takeaway. Because now you have the tools. The next time you hear an argument, you can spot these things. You can see how an argument is built, and you can decide for yourself if it's actually strong or if it's just smoke and mirrors. This isn't about taking a political side, it's about being a smarter thinker.
And that really leaves us with one final big question to chew on. We live in a world that is just flooded with arguments. They're passionate, they're persuasive, and a lot of them are logically flawed. So, in the middle of all that noise, how do we make sure the truth doesn't just get lost in the crossfire? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.